on this, just what is exactly, we've heard about Barnett formula consequences, and we've heard how different agriculture is in Scotland and it needs to be viewed differently. What is your ask of the UK government when it comes to spending specifically? Is it 650 million each year infinitum? Is it more than that? Is it inflation linked? What is your specific ask of the Treasury with regards to the agricultural budget? Because then if you were certainly unclear what their ask of the Scottish Government was in regards to that. So actually, what are you asking the UK Government for, and how would that money be formulated, if you like?
Well, we'd essentially be asking for our fair share of funding going forward, because we're already facing a shortfall in what we were promised on the back of Brexit, that agriculture funding would be replaced in full, which it hasn't been. So we've got a £93 million shortfall. So we would at least be expecting that.
So you're looking for 720 million?
Again, we would welcome. We would, of course, welcome more funding from the UK Government, but I think that we should. You've
got to. So this is really, really important. You need to have an ask. Are you going to ask for 800 million this year and next year? You've talked about multi-year funding. How are you going to pull together that ask? Is it 800 million? Is it 900 million? How will you negotiate that? Will it be ring-fenced? I just need to have a clear in my mind, because we asked the NFU this and they weren't actually clear. They said, well, 650 million, that's fine, more or less. We'll have that next year, but as long as it's multi-year. What are you actually asking the Treasury for? Do you have to put a business plan down for what you foresee the spend in agriculture over the next 5-10 years is, and have them approve it? In which case, that wouldn't suggest that agriculture's devolved. What is your actual ask of the UK Treasury over the next 5 years?
That's the thing. I mean, all these points that you're talking about, it's not as straightforward as going and asking for a set, X million pounds in funding. As I've said, we would at least be expecting the previous promises to be fulfilled and for that shortfall that we've got to be addressed. But the whole point is that we need to have that discussion on allocations. We need to go through this.
What's your position?
In the detail. We need to discuss that with the UK Government.
No,
I mean, I can't set out the committee today a definitive figure, because we need to have the discussion on how these allocations are going to work going forward. But again, we're not even getting that far.
But you've said you've asked for this discussion over and over and over. But what we need to know, and the Scottish farmers need to know, is what your position is. Do you see this as a fixed grant? And how do you come about that? Is it you agree your agriculture policy and you go to the Treasury and say, we need £800 million to fund this? What's your policy going forward? What's your ideal situation? Is it inflation linked? Is it, what is it? Because that's completely unclear what your ask of the Treasury is.
I would simply say it's probably not a best way to begin a negotiation by broadcasting what your starting point and your fallback is. So I think it wouldn't be a good thing for us to do at this stage.
I don't think that the farmers in Scotland will think that's a good position. They want to have some sort of clarity. And so that you don't have a position on your ideal scenario, whether that's 800 or 900 or a billion going forward, how that would be formulated, how you'd work that out. No.
Again, I think we're getting into questions here. I think, first of all, as George has set out, it's not appropriate for us to discuss right here, right now, what we would be looking to go into that with. But again, I think we've still got the critical points that need to be addressed. The complete lack of clarity, the shortfall that we have so far, which at least needs to be addressed in the interim, in which we would expect to be addressed going forward. And we want to have that discussion about what an allocation would look like for Scotland, as was promised through the Bew Review, which as yet has not been fulfilled and where we are being ignored.
But what clarity are you seeking?
Again, I've already outlined that going forward. I mean, we need to have a clarity and a certainty over what that funding is going to look like, because we can't plan beyond 2025 in terms of budgets or even get an overall figure of what that looks like, which means that we are constrained in what we can do. So initially, we want that clarity, but the most important thing is having that first conversation and taking that forward, which isn't happening.
Alistair.
On that point, presumably it doesn't come down to what you ask for, it comes down to what you're given. Were things simpler when you had a regime of 7-year funding, as used to be the case pre-Brexit?
Yes.
So if you want a 7-year funding, that's one of your asks. So that's one of the things you can ask the Treasury. The next bit is how you're going to formulate your ask. Is it going to be based on environmental schemes? It's going to be based on production? And how would that be reviewed over a 7-year period? I would have thought that's a fairly straightforward question. What is your position on what your desired outcome might be, rather than waiting for clarity from the UK government? And I don't know how they can base that.
Again, we need to have that conversation going forward. I mean, ultimately, we want to be able to design a system and to be able to fund a system that works for us in Scotland, and not to have those constraints from the UK government.
What constraints?
So, again, the ones that we've talked about so far in relation to what we could face in relation to the potential policy constraints on what we design going forward. We've talked about the multi-annual funding as well. But again, I think you're trying to pin me down on responses that I can't give you today. But
okay.
The important thing is we need to make sure that we're getting these shortfalls addressed, and that we're at least starting to have those conversations, which haven't begun yet.
But it's a bit hypocritical. You can't tell us about the 33 million shortfall, never mind any other shortfalls.
That's not hypocritical at all. And I think you're confusing points which aren't remotely related.
Yeah, certainly.
Language.
I suppose clarity over certainty, and I would suggest the position on the 33 million isn't unlike the uncertainty we get going forward.
I would disagree with that, because 33 million will be returned to the portfolio and must be spent in the portfolio, whereas we don't know what funding will be allocated to the portfolio, or how much we will get, or when that will come.
Okay, thank you for that.